All right, hope you enjoyed your lunch, ladies and gentlemen. We are still in the direct examination of Officer Burke. Go ahead.
Okay, Officer Burke, I think where we were was I was asking you about your collection of the gun in this case.
Yes, ma'am.
There's some files up there.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, what I'm gonna ask you to do is to open this. Well, first, you recognize this box.
Yes.
And what is this box?
This box is the standard firearm collection case
Direct
that we use
examination
at
of
Knoxville
Officer
Police.
Burke. Go ahead.
This is the standard firearm collection box that we would use at the Knoxville Police Department to collect firearm evidence.
Okay, and so is there any markings or notes on this box that indicates to you that you've done anything with this box?
Yes, so I can see that I was the one that sealed this box. I checked it for any hits on warrants or stolen firearms. It was negative on that check. I can see that I collected it, date, the case number, victim, location, and exactly what is in this box. I can also see that I ran it for DNA and that I checked it for latent prints as well.
Okay, and so we'll talk about DNA and latent prints here in just a second, but as far as you putting the gun in the box whenever you get it from Balsam Drive, did you put the date that you collected this?
Correct, yes, ma'am.
What date was that?
That was 9/14 of 2019.
Okay, and if you could open the box and then let me know, do you have a knife?
I do not.
Alright, if you could tell me, do you recognize the items in the box?
Yes.
Your Honor, if we could mark this collectively as the next exhibit.
Mark the box and its contents is number 27.
Alright, let me hand you exhibit 27, and what I want you to do is I want you to take each item out and show it to the jury, and then if you can walk the items down in front of the jury and explain what they're.
Make sure the firearm is clear.
Yes, sir. Firearm is clear, sir.
And if you want to set the things down on this table, that's fine too.
Can you speak more specifically?
You close enough to the jury that they should be able to hear you, so just speak as loud as you can, and we'll put you on the mic too.
So this is the firearm as it was found on scene. This is a normal semi-automatic firearm made by Taurus, Millennium G2 P111. Very popular weapon. It was found under the bush outside. The magazine from the weapon, it has a little bit of tarnishing on it. That is due to the super glue fuming we do to try to get fingerprints off of it.
When this, are you the one that actually picked it up from the bush?
Yes, no one touched it before I touched it.
Okay, and where was the magazine whenever you first encountered the weapon?
The magazine was in the weapon.
Okay, and are there rounds in the magazine?
There were, yes, ma'am.
How many rounds were in the magazine?
The 4 live rounds still in the magazine when I covered it.
Okay, what else did you note about that particular weapon when you first came into contact with it?
So it was, when I first came in contact with it, the weapon was in an operational, it was in battery is what we call it. The slide was forward, like so this gun is safe. The slide was forward and the magazine was in the weapon like this. I went to make the gun safe, removed the magazine so no live rounds go back into the chamber. I removed the magazine, I went to make the gun safe, and as I did, I noticed that there was a spent shell casing stuck inside the chamber. We call it a stovepipe. It was stuck inside the chamber. It was stuck in there, and so when I went to cycle, it wanted to fall through. I stopped and immediately took a photograph of it so that I could show that that was stuck in the chamber.
Okay, and so you used the word stovepipe. Can you explain to the jury what you mean when you use the word stovepipe?
there's two different kind of, there's a failure to eject where the the casing fails to leave the chamber. Everybody sees a semi-automatic handgun. When you fire a round, the slide cycles back and the spent casing gets shot out the side. It's called ejection. When it doesn't do that, it's called a fail to eject. When the round gets caught in here, you can kind of see the casing sticking out. It's a pipe, they call it a stovepipe. It's kind of shooting out the side.
And so when you encountered the weapon and picked it up off the ground or were making it safe, that's when you noticed that there was a stovepipe, there was a casing.
There was a failure to eject. There was a casing still locked in the chamber. Yes, ma'am.
What other items do you have in that box?
So the weapon, the magazine, I have the spent casing that was recovered from the chamber. I have the 4 live rounds from the magazine, and I have the DNA swabs as collected off the weapon.
Okay, if you could open the spent casing, you
Yeah,
can
let me.
change clothes, that's fine.
You said the spent casing? So this is the spent casing. This is the.
Maybe hold that and walk down and show the tree.
So this is the spent casing. This is the spent casing recovered. It's a 9mm. It's 9mm, and you can see the primer was struck. That is what causes the bullet to be fired. That doesn't be fired from the shell casing.
So again, this is the one that was stuck in the weapon, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. This was.
There's 2 other jurors on the end.
Oh, I apologize.
And if you will put that back in here, and then if we can make this particular envelope 27A.
All right, file that as 27A, which will be the spent casing.
And then you said that there were also rounds in the magazine, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. there was.
Are they in an envelope as well?
They are, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and you'll just show those to jurors.
These are the live rounds that we recovered from the magazine weapon.
And there are 4 there, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
We can make this 27B. And I'm gonna let you go back and have a seat. I will bring Okay, you indicated there were 2 additional things that you did.
Yes, ma'am.
on this test. What was the first one that you did?
We collect DNA.
Okay, and so tell the jury about that, please.
So anytime we have a firearm, it's standard practice for us to collect DNA off of the weapon. If you look at the photograph that I had when I first put the firearm in the box, you can actually see the empty swab paper, the empty swab container, because before I ever touch it, just due to cross-contamination issues, I will swab first. So we get photographed in. I put new gloves on. I swab the firearm, and then I move in to make the firearm safe. So on a firearm, we will swab 3 places.
You had indicated
Let me-
something in this box. Where are you talking about?
So if you look at the top, kind of right, there's a white piece of paper there. That's the empty sheath that a set of swabs comes in, a sterile set of swabs.
And for the record, we're looking at Exhibit 26.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, go ahead.
So we collect, it'd be easier if I show you, but we collect DNA from 3 different places on the firearm. One is the trigger. That's obvious. These semi-automatic weapons, as I'll show you, have a trigger with a safety integral to the trigger itself. And that supposed to allow people who are not meaning to fire the gun to prevent them from firing the gun. But due to the firearm itself and the way the trigger is ribbed, we collect DNA from the trigger. We collect DNA from the grip, where there's a roughed surface that can grab finger cells. And we collect it from the slide right here as well. I'll walk around and show you. But we collect it from this slide as well, because these are very rough ridges providing grip when you pull back the gun. And the spring is kind of heavy, so they make them very aggressive. These areas collect the most DNA. So that's why we collect it from there. Should I show?
Sure.
Yeah. This right there here on the slide, this aggressive grip, and the trigger has parts of the trigger as well. The grip on the slide, the aggressive grip material on the grip, and the
Speak up.
There's a microphone right there beside you.
So the ridges on the side of the slide, the aggressive grip material on the grip of the gun, and the ridges in the trigger itself.
And then you said you also did fingerprint swabs.
Yes, that's correct. That we did. It's called cyanoacrylate fuming, but it's super glue fuming.
We have to go back up
Yes,
there,
ma'am.
just so you're more comfortable. Can you tell the jury about that?
Is there any question your client handled? Move along.
You also did fingerprint examination?
That's correct. We put it into a hood and we use the standard scientific practice where we fume super glue into the chamber. Any amino acids from the fingerprint will develop a fingerprint.
Okay. And so in this particular case, were you able to retrieve fingerprints from that gun?
No, ma'am.
And why is that?
It's incredibly hard. I would say maybe 5% of all firearms that I ever got had a fingerprint. And I think maybe 1 semi-automatic with these rough texture, the polymer grip, and the way that these are designed, they're actually designed to spread oil so they don't look as bad and get dirty as fast. So any oils and amino acids that are on the surface of the gun go away very quickly. And, yeah.
So you weren't able to retrieve any fingerprints in this case?
No, ma'am.
You will return those items to that box, and then you will make that weapon safe. All right, so we were talking earlier about the different times when different things happened. And so I want to get let me hand you exhibits 26, 25, and 24.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm going to write while you. Okay, so what was the time that you told me that you initially arrived at the scene? I think you said 8:10. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right.
The time I took the first photo.
Okay.
But, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. So is 8:10 when you actually took the first photo?
No, ma'am. It was 9:10.
All right. And so explain to the jury where you got 8:10 and why it's actually 9:10.
So we're taught to testify as to the time of the metadata of the photo. So you can look at any photo, any digital photo you take, and find out when that photo was created originally. And so we testify as to the metadata that comes with this original photograph. But I know from my notes and from my report that my camera was off 1 hour when I took those photos.
And why would your camera be off by an hour?
Most likely a daylight savings time issue. We take millions of photographs over 5-6 years, and sometimes you just forget to change the date and time.
So the first set of photos that you did that was of the initial crime scene was at 9:10. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And then the second set of photos that you did, starting with the remote, when did that start?
That would have been 10:10.
Okay, and the
And
next.
for the record, so we're talking about 24 is the first set, 25 is the second set.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yes, you are. And then exhibit 26, whenever you all found the firearm, I believe you testified that you started taking photos almost immediately thereafter?
Yes, ma'am.
What time was that?
That was 11:05, 11:06.
11:05, 11:06, and that is the gun. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. After you took those initial photos on the scene, was there anywhere else? What's the next thing you did? After you took the 3 sets of photos we just talked about.
So during this time, it's somewhat chaotic, and we're trying to get as much evidence as we can and still meet the wishes of the investigators. And there's multiple investigators on scene, multiple officers. Around this time, once we had the gun, we're doing an in-depth search for evidence. It all has to fit into it's not a strict schedule, but we also would, around this time, once things are calming down, I'm looking to run my Faro scan, my laser scanner. I'm looking to do very in-depth search for extra evidence that wasn't found on the initial sweep, looking for anything else that we could have missed.
So at this point, you found the cartridge, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, we had already found that in the weapon.
But you've not found the projectile, is that
Correct.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Is the next thing, did you ever go to UT Hospital for testing?
Right after this, I believe it was Investigator Wardlaw asked us to go collect the photos and the clothing from the victim at the hospital.
Let me hand you these photos and ask you, do you recognize those photos?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are those photos of?
These are photographs taken at UT Medical Center of bullet penetration or penetrating wounds on the victim.
What time did you go and take those pictures at?
My metadata says 10:50. That would have been 11:50 p.m.
So 11:50? And is that true and accurate representations of some of the photos that you took of Destiny?
Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if we could make this the next exhibit?
Collective again.
Yes, there are 4 photos.
If those be marked in bold.
And if I could have permission to publish exhibit 28 to the jury.
Any objection? You may pass those to the jury.
While the jury's looking at that, can you just describe briefly what you did at UT Medical Center?
When at this point, I believe I knew that the victim was deceased. We went to the medical center. The first thing I did was attempt to locate the clothing of the victim, because sometimes the doctors aren't charged with collection of evidence. They will just dispose of it as biohazard. So my first order of business was to get that clothing, which I was able to recover. My second order of business was to get photography evidence of the wounds to the victim.
So did you take a picture of both sides of her hands?
Yes, ma'am. Her right hand.
And did you also take a picture of the front and the back of her body?
Yes, ma'am.
You said that you actually collected her clothing first?
Yes, ma'am.
you recognize the item in front of you?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
This was collected at the hospital from, I'm sorry, this was at the ME office.
At the ME's office?
The victim's clothing, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so do you recall if that clothing was collected, at the ME's office then? Is your handwriting on this?
This is my handwriting. This is the address for the ME office.
Okay, and so, I think that you said that you thought you collected it at the hospital, now that
That's
you're looking
correct.
at it, is the ME's office?
Yes, ma'am.
Um,
Anytime you get a murder, excuse me, anytime there's a victim of an unnatural violent death, the ME always has jurisdiction of the victim and all of their property and possessions, so they would have taken this to the ME office.
Okay, and so what was the date that you collected that from the ME's office?
That was 9/26 of 19.
If you could open that? We could make this one the next exhibit. There were 3 bags.
Three.
That bag or are there other bags?
I'm gonna have this bag, I'm gonna put those 3 back in.
Okay, so that bag and its contents is collective 29.
29.
And that is
Okay.
clothing.
The
Well, I'm
clothing
informed.
of Destiny Oliver, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, now there were 3 bags here, and the first one is a shirt, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Second one is some shorts,
Yes, ma'am.
and the third one's some underwear.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we don't need to open the shorts or the underwear, so I'm gonna put those back into Exhibit 29, but if you could open Destiny's shirt. And then I'm gonna have you do the same thing where you walk down in front of the jury so they can see that.
This is the shirt the victim was wearing when she was recovered by officers. It's cut in the front because the medical personnel were obviously attempting life-saving efforts, but it was recovered like this from the medical exam.
Okay, is the front of the shirt the portion that's cut?
Yes, ma'am.
Were there any defects in that shirt?
There's a defect in the back of the shirt.
And if you can just show that to the jury and make sure that you them and that they see it as well.
This is the defect in the back of the shirt.
Here, ma'am, in the jury, you can see, you're welcome to stand up and look closer if you need to.
Is there a defect in the front as well, or is that cut with scissors?
It was possibly cut with the scissors. I can't go. I located a defect in the front as well.
You can show that to the jury as well. into the bag labeled Exhibit 21. So I want to go back to September 14th of 2019 when you all were taking photographs of the house. You indicated that you took photographs of the scene, then you took photographs of the remote control, and then you also took photographs of the gun where it lay. Did you also collect those items such as the remote control?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay, did this item and asked, do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am.
What is that item?
This is the envelope containing the remote control with the perforation defect.
Okay. And there's also a note on there that I see that says RBS. What does RBS stand for?
That's shorthand that we use internally to refer to a reddish brown substance.
Okay. Could that be blood?
It could be blood.
Typically is.
It typically is.
All right. And this is, what is the item in this bag?
This is the LG remote.
And is that the remote that we've seen in the pictures that's on the sofa?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If we could make this the next exhibit?
That'd be marked and filed as 30.
And if you could open this item and just hold it up for the jury and tell them what it is.
This is the remote control with the bullet penetration defect in it and the reddish brown stain. Anybody see?
And the bullet defect is where?
The entrance defect is here. And an exit defect is here.
So on the front of the remote and then through the back of the remote, is that correct?
Correct.
Also collected towel.
Yes, ma'am.
Hand you this item and asked you to recognize that.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that?
This is a green towel that was on the scene in front of the couch near the reddish brown stain where the victim was found.
And if we could make this the next exhibit.
Marked and filed as 31. 31.
31. And if you could open exhibit 31 and publish that to the jury, please. 31. 31.
This is a green towel found in the approximate location of where the victim was supposedly found.
Okay, we'll see that in some pictures here in just a minute. Is that correct?
Correct.
Are there any reddish brown stains on that towel?
Yes.
Put that back in there. Hand you this next item and ask you to recognize that.
I do.
What is that, a picture, or what is that item?
This item is the pillow that was on the couch, the throw pillow was on the couch with the defect in it.
Okay. And this is the third pillow,
This is the third pillow from the left, yes, ma'am.
and you said it's the one without the fringes, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
We could make that the next exhibit, 32,
That'd be marked and filed.
and permission for him to open and publish exhibit 32.
This is the pillow with the bullet defect found, third from the left, without frills, the one that was sitting up.
And I'm sorry to make you keep coming up and down, but if you could you orient that the way that it would have been sitting on the couch?
The way the pillow was sitting on the couch, if you were standing in front of the couch, would have been like this.
Okay, so the defect in the pillow is on the left side,
Yes, ma'am.
kind of mid to upper portion of the pillow. Is that
Yes, ma'am.
accurate? Okay. You could just walk this way and then make sure these gentlemen over here can see that.
When I walk around, the defect may be hard to see, but it is circled with my initials in black.
Okay, and after you found that defect, that's when you circled it with your initials?
That's correct. I found it, located it, we photographed it, recovered the projectile, and then after the evidentiary value was gone, we circled it.
You will put that back in how it was packaged. You got it? And let me hand you this final item and ask you to recognize that.
Yes, ma'am, I do. This is the recovered projectile that came out of that pillow.
Came out of the pillow?
The pillow that we just looked at, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so just so that it's clear to the jury, that projectile went into that pillow, correct?
That's correct, through that
It did not
defect.
come out of the pillow, it stayed in the pillow.
Correct.
Okay, and so, if you could open that and show the jury, we could make this exhibit 33. And if you could show that to the jury.
Because of the nature of the evidence, it was also placed into a smaller container, also sealed. This is the projectile recovered from the pillow.
I think this is the last time I'm gonna ask you to do that. So you're gonna place it back in the original envelope?
Yes, ma'am.
Place that envelope back into, the honor envelope, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Alright, so now that we've, talked about some of those items, I wanna talk a little bit more about some more of the photography you did that day.
Yes, ma'am.
Let me show you this next group of pictures and ask you to recognize them.
Yes, ma'am.
And what are those group of pictures?
More evidence that was found at the scene. The remote control and a broken fingernail that I recovered.
And what time did you take this set of pictures?
The real time would have been 1:15 a.m. 1:15.
15.
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
so now we're on to September 15th, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and so, if we could make those the next exhibit, Your Honor?
34. Broken fingernail.
So just two.
Five. Okay, so I want to be clear about the timeline. After you went to UT Medical Center and got the photographs of Destiny, do you remember a point in time where Detective Riddle and Detective Wardlaw and Phyllis Tonkin came back to the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And when they came back to the scene, they came back with the defendant, is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
Okay, so these set of photos, are these being taken whenever they're back at the scene?
They would have been at the scene. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and so that starts at 1:15?
Yes, ma'am.
Commission calls these to the jury.
Amen.
You can have the lights.
Let's hit the first guy.
Can you tell the jury what this is?
This is that same LG remote that I showed.
This?
This is another photograph from that living area towards the main door. This is so I was establishing the location of this artifact. This is the bathroom, and that to the left would be that leather couch in that front den area. This is the bathroom on the left-hand side, entranceway, and we're looking at the pillar that you would walk through.
Okay, and so what is the next picture of?
This is the small piece of broken fingernail, purple in color.
Okay, and the last picture.
Close-up of that same artifact.
Okay, and again, just to orient the jury, this threshold that we're looking at in the third picture, this one right here that's up on the screen, where is this? Where are we talking about in the house?
So the front door is to the left.
Okay.
Where the victim was found is just behind me to the right, and I'm looking straight into the bathroom. If I reached out my left hand, I would touch that fireplace in the den.
Okay.
So as you're walking through the front door and you go past that front den area, before you get into the next living area, the pillar that you walk past, it's there on the left.
So while you are at the scene at this point in time with Detective Riddle and Detective Wardlaw and Phyllis Tonkin and the defendant, at some point in time, did somebody ask you to move the stool or ask somebody to move the stool?
Yes.
Okay, and to photograph also a closet that was there?
Yes.
And did you do that?
We did.
All right. Let me hand you the next set of photographs and ask, do you recognize these?
Yes, I do.
What are those photographs of?
These are photographs that were taken of the closet in what I would consider to be the master bedroom.
Okay, and was that at the direction of Detective Riddle?
Yes, ma'am.
And how many photographs are in that one? Is it
11?
11, okay. And what time was it that you took these photographs?
This would have been 3:20 a.m.
3:20?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's of the closet?
This is of the master bedroom closet.
If we could make this the next exhibit.
I think those we marked and filed as 35.
And permission to publish these to the jury. You will tell the jury what we're looking at in these next set of photographs.
This is the closet, so the stool has already been moved into place. We did a walkthrough with with Ms. Howington, and while we were doing that walkthrough, the stool was moved into this location, and I started photographing after the video walkthrough. So this is that closet with the stool in place.
And so, just so that we're clear, Now go back to exhibit 24. The stool, so that you could take that picture, was moved from here to that closet, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
Okay. Alright, so to get the stool there, where would you have had to walk?
From where we found the stool when we were walking in, it's kept at a little table. You would take it from the far end of the living room closest to the kitchen, and you would walk it through the living room, around a corner, and into the master bedroom.
Let me show you exhibit 24, you're saying through this whole entire room?
Correct. You would walk toward the camera, and then go around this little armchair that's in the front of the photo, and then you would take a right. Well, you would take a left.
Alright, please tell the jury what's in the next photo.
This is the top of the closet.
And the next?
This is a 90-degree on view of the closet with the stool in front of it, bottom. And this is the same view of the top with the black bag. This is the closet door. There was no handle on the inside. Another view of the broken handle on the closet door. There was no frame damage to the closet door. I think I was just trying to take a photo of the black bag in relationship to the doorway. Another view of the chipped paint around the door frame.
And what about what is happening in this particular photograph?
In this photograph, we're photographing the height from the top of the closet where the black bag was found down to the top of the stool.
And what is the distance from where the bag was to the stool?
It was 51 inches, which is 4'3" inches. 51 inches, yeah.
Okay. Did you take any additional photographs?
I did.
What is the next thing that you photographed?
We went to the neighbor's house. I guess the young son, Gavin, was familiar with the neighbor, so he was in with Investigator Tonkin. They were over at the neighbor's house, and the young boy had fallen asleep.
Okay, you're talking about Gavin?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you take some pictures of Gavin as well?
We did.
Let me hand you these 5 photographs and ask you to recognize them.
I do.
What are these 5 photographs of?
Of Gavin on the couch and of measurements we took.
We could make those the next exhibit. And what time did you go do that?
That was about 4 a.m.
Permission to publish these to the jury. You said it was about 4 p.m.?
4 a.m.
4 a.m.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you describe for the jury what's in this first picture?
This is Gavin when I entered the residence, this was Gavin on the neighbor's couch.
This picture?
In this picture, we had placed a measuring tape alongside him. I was trying to get his full body in frame, not necessarily take the measurement there.
This one?
This is a rough estimate of how tall he was without extending his arm, just head to foot. He's about 3 foot 1 inches tall, 3 foot tall.
And then somebody take his arm and extend it for this picture?
That's correct. I believe the neighbor took the arm, extended it out, and it contracted a little bit, but we just did the best we could to measure from the tip of his finger down his body to the base of his feet.
And what is the measurement from his finger to foot?
It was 42 inches from fingertip to the ball of, or from to the heel of the foot, and then the ball was like another inch, 43.
And so did you all wake Gavin up to take these pictures?
No, we manipulated him, but he was a sound sleeper.
Okay, and you're aware that later on in the investigation, that there were pictures taken of Gavin while he was awake, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, and he was much more cooperative then.
Okay, and so, but these are the pictures that were taken on September 15th, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you also charged with collecting Gavin's clothing and the defendant's clothing?
Yes, ma'am.
Hand you this and ask what is in this bag,
This is Gavin's clothing.
right? And when was that collected?
That was collected on 9/15 in the it was right after these photos were taken.
Okay, so, you took photos of Gavin and also his clothing, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And is this his clothing?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if we could make this the next exhibit.
That'll be marked and filed as 37.
And if you could open exhibit 37 and show that to the jury.
There are two pieces of individually packed clothing, the Nike gray t-shirt and the black shorts.
If you could open the shirt.
This is the shirt the victim was wearing when we photographed him and changed his clothes.
Now, you said the victim, do you mean Gavin?
I apologize. Yes, this was the clothes that Gavin was wearing when we talked to him, or when we were photographing about 4 a.m.
Okay, and so are you aware if this shirt was sent to be tested for gunshot residue?
It was, these are gunshot residue tests.
Okay, and those kits are in that same exhibit that you just opened, is that correct?
Correct.
All right. If you could place the shirt back into this bag, I don't know if we could make this bag with just this shirt in it, exhibit 37A.
The shirt be filed as 37.
Was that the only thing in here?
Yes, ma'am.
And then if you could just put the other items back into exhibit 37.
Were the GSR kits in the bigger bag or the smaller?
In the bigger bag, sir.
So going into exhibit 37 is the 2 GSR kits, the shorts.
The black shorts.
And then 37A, which we opened, which
Yes,
is Gavin's shirt, right? Did you also test, or did you also collect the defendant's dress?
Yes.
And this, I'm gonna ask you about when that was collected.
That was collected 9/15, so September 15th of 2019.
And so, can you tell me if this item that I've handed you, is that her dress?
Yes, ma'am.
Can we make that the next exhibit?
That'll be marked and filed as 38.
If you could open that, and if you can have permission to publish that to the jury. Same thing, is there a GSR kit in here?
Yes, ma'am.
show you these last set of photographs and ask, do you recognize these?
Yes, ma'am.
And what are those photographs of?
These are photographs of the pillow with the bullet defect in them.
And there are 10 photographs there.
Yes, ma'am.
If we could make that collectively the next exhibit.
Let it be marked in files 39.
Okay, and before we pull these up on the screen, can you explain to the jury what you did as far as with the couch and with the pillow?
As we finished up with Gavin, we were finishing up the scene. I was speaking with Investigator Wardlaw, was on scene at the time. We were talking about a final sweep of the crime scene, just making sure that we had every bit of evidence we would want. Investigator Wardlaw expressed that the investigative team wanted to take the entire couch. We knew that's where she was found. We had not found a projectile or a defect at this time, so we wanted to take the entire couch. We took the couch as evidence, put it in a box truck, immediately transported it to our evidence facility at the crime scene investigation unit. We have a big garage. Put it in the garage. I photographed the clothing and put it in a drying machine, and then we sealed the garage up as a evidence unit. We came back later that day due to hours. We came back, I think it was like 2:30 or 3 p.m. to process the actual couch. And while we were processing the couch, we found the defect.
Okay, and so let me show you the photos that we've just introduced as the last exhibit. First, I want to ask you, do we have this oriented correctly where the defect is in the on the left side towards the middle? Is it oriented correctly as it would have been on the couch?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, go ahead.
So when we moved the couch to our evidence facility, we left the pillows in place. We just picked the whole couch up, put it in there. When we got it to Fifth Avenue, at our evidence facility, and we didn't touch it until we came back that next day. While we were looking through the pillows one by one, we found a defect. It's on this pillow, and it's very hard to see right now, but there's a small red fiber, and it was right next to that red fiber. That is little up, right, yeah, so you're a little to the left, little more. There's the red fiber. That red fiber was very close proximity to the defect.
Show you the next photo. Is this oriented correctly how it would have been on the couch?
Yes, ma'am.
Where is the defect that you were talking about?
That there's a red fiber moving across to the right-hand side. That's the defect. To the right, there it is right there.
Next photo.
While the way we found that defect, I was squeezing the couch looking for the projectile and found the projectile. Then we found the defect. This,
Feel it in the pillow.
you could feel the projectile.
Okay.
And then this is the projectile inside, just breaching the defect on the way out.
And so are you going to take the projectile out of the pillow through the hole that it went into the pillow in?
Yes, ma'am.
This next picture?
This is the projectile coming back out the defect.
Okay, so that's literally you pulling it out of the pillow, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
What is this a photo of?
This is what we call an ABFO scale. All it does is give you on a perpendicular line, gives you the measurement of the defect. Because it's in cloth, it seals pretty well. It's very hard to tell the size of the defect, but I measured it either way.
And is that the last photo that you took?
Yes, ma'am.
If I can have just 1 minute.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
You doing okay up there?
Doing all right, yes, sir.
Good.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for asking. I just want to clear up a little confusion on that first part of timing and camera and
Yes, sir.
clock. So your camera was 1 hour back.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you thought that you picked up those clothes at UTMC, but it turned out it was a medical examiner's office.
Yes, sir.
Did you do anything at UTMC, if you know?
Other than take the photos, that's it.
Okay. Oh. Judge, could you slip that back over on my side,
You need the screen.
please? You've identified this photograph, right?
Yes, sir.
I think that's in the collective 35. So we've got this photograph with that bag hanging way down off the shelf. And then I think the one, nope. This one, is that the same bag?
It is the same bag, yes, sir.
Do you know how that different orientation came about?
When we first got on scene, the bag wasn't in there. The bag was hanging off a door handle. And as they're doing the walkthrough, the defendant grabbed the bag and put it up there to show approximately where it would have been. While they were talking, this is after the walkthrough we did. They asked us to measure to the bottom, not necessarily to the bag, to the bottom of the actual shelf there, yes, sir, or to the top of the shelf, yes, sir. So we approximated about an inch above the shelf to the bottom of the bag.
And up on the top of that shelf there's that bag and high-heeled shoes.
Yes, sir. We moved that bag back just to get the measurement from a firm location, yes, sir. That bag was, when we went to go take that measurement, still hanging in the front.
And had you not come up here, you would have been on a boat in the coastal waters of Florida today.
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, and I appreciate you coming up here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Just briefly, so just to be clear, the person that moved the bag, you said it was on the handle of the door?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that door, in one of the pictures, you can see that the handle on the inside of the door is just like a screw.
Yes,
And on the
ma'am.
outside, there's an actual knob, is
There's
that
a knob.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Was the door on the inside of was the
I-
bag on the inside of the door or on the outside? And if
I-
you don't recall, that's
I can't
okay.
recall. I know it was on that door because I remember Investigator Wardlaw exclaiming that she moved it.
Okay, he was concerned that she was moving
Yes,
the
ma'am.
bag from the door up into the top of the closet.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
that correct? That's all.
Anything further?
Did you say the bedroom door had just a screw on one side, or the closet?
The closet door had, yes, sir.
Was a photograph ever taken of the bag on the door?
No, sir.
Okay.
All right, you may step down, have a safe trip back to Florida. Call your next witness.
Rudy McGowan.
If you would raise your right hand, please, and be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Have a seat, adjust the microphone if you need to speak directly into it.
you please state your name and spell it for the court reporter, please?
Yes, Rudy McGowan, Rudy, R-U-D-I-E, McGowan, M-C-G-O-W-E-N.
And Ms. McGowan, where do you work?
I'm at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the Nashville headquarters.
And what do you do at the TBI?
Currently, I'm a human resource officer, and I'm in the Human Resources Division.
How long have you been in human resources?
This is my 4th year coming up.
And prior to, I guess about 2020, when you went into human resources, did you work for TBI at that point as well?
Yes, I did.
And what did you do then?
Before 2020?
Yes.
Yes, I was a forensic technician in the Nashville Crime Lab.
Okay, and can you just tell the jury a little bit about what it means to be a forensic technician?
Yes, to be a forensic technician, it means that you receive evidence from the law enforcement agencies in Tennessee.
And the Nashville office, does it receive evidence from just Nashville or all agencies outside of Nashville as well?
The agencies outside of Nashville as well.
Okay. And is that because only certain testing is done in Nashville as opposed to all over the state?
That is correct.
And can you tell the jury a little bit about how it is that the Nashville office will receive evidence from outside agencies?
When the evidence is received, we take evidence by hand and as well as in the mail.
And particularly, I want to talk about, were you working in this capacity in October of 2019?
Yes, I was.
And did you receive several pieces of evidence in this particular case?
I did.
And do you recall how it was that you received them?
Yes, I received these pieces of evidence through the mail via FedEx.
Is there any
Judge,
question on chain of custody?
I'm not contesting chain of custody.
Okay.
Well, that cuts down on my questions a whole lot, Mrs. McGowan.
I take it you looked at the evidence, you logged it in, and documented where it came from, correct?
That is correct.
All right.
Your Honor, I guess at this point, if we could at least just have,
Go ahead and show her that document, let her identify that.
okay, so when evidence comes in, you log it in TBI's internal system, and it creates a chain of custody.
That is correct.
And does that chain of custody document every time that a piece of evidence is taken out by anybody or for testing or anything like that?
That is correct as well.
And do you recognize this document that I'm showing you here?
I do.
And is this the chain of custody for this particular case?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, if we could have this as the next
Let
number
that be
exhibit.
marked and filed as number 40.
And then when you receive evidence, does it also come with a request for examination from the agency that is actually sending you the evidence?
Yes, yes.
And is that what this form that I'm showing you here
Yes.
is? And that's the one that you received with the evidence in this particular case?
Yes.
I don't know if this could be the next number
Let that be
exhibit.
marked and filed as 41.
And just so we're clear, Ms. McGowan, when you received this evidence, you said that you received it via a FedEx package.
Yes, that is correct.
Did it show any signs of tampering or damage or anything like that when
Not
you
at
received
all.
it? Okay. And then once you received it, did you then put it in TBI's secured vault?
Yes.
And at that point in time, is the only people who have access to that, is that going to be the agents that work for your agency?
Almost. The people that have access to the vault, it's very limited. It's only the TBI director, the assistant director of the laboratory himself, the laboratory manager, my forensic technician supervisor, and the six forensic technicians that I worked with.
And in this particular case, once all the testing that was needed to be done was completed, did the TBI then send the evidence back to the Knoxville Police Department?
Yes, they did.
That's all I got, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any questions?
No, thank you for coming.
Have a safe trip back to Nashville. Thank you. Call your next witness. Come around, please, and as you approach the witness stand, raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, please.
Afternoon. If you would please state your name and spell it for our court reporter, please.
Kyle Osborne, Kyle-Osborne.
And where are you currently employed?
I am currently employed at the U.S. Army Crime Lab.
And how long have you been with the U.S. Army Crime Lab?
About 2.5 years.
Prior to, I'm going to say, what, about 2022, where did you work at that point?
Before that, I was employed at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Nashville Crime Laboratory.
And how long did you work for TBI?
I worked for the TBI for 7 years.
And were you working there back in late 2019?
I was.
Early 2020, late 2019?
I was.
And what was your specific job title at that point in time?
I was a special agent forensic scientist assigned to the microanalysis unit.
Okay. And I apologize, I don't know if you still have the same title, but I'm going to call you Agent Osborne just because I'm going off your report here unless I need to call you something else. Is that okay?
As of now, I'm no longer a special agent, so
Well, I'm going to go off this report and I'll just refer to that just to make it a little bit easier, if that's okay. All right, so before we get into this, I want to talk a little bit about your education and your training prior to coming to the TBI. Can you tell the jury about that?
Judge, the state can ask if they want. We're not contesting his qualification.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, both sides agree that this witness is an expert in the field of microanalysis. For that reason, the rules of evidence provide that he may offer opinion testimony. Go ahead.
All right, and so I guess, Your Honor, just for purposes of the record, I think we would also ask that the witness be tendered as an expert in gunshot residue, primer residue, as well as microanalysis, as the court said.
What is give me the full title of your field of expertise at the time.
gunshot primer residue for this case, Your Honor.
Gunshot primer residue. Okay, go ahead.
And just for purposes of the record, I know that we've already tendered you as an expert. Could you at least just tell us where you went to school and what degrees you hold at this time?
Yes, so I have a bachelor's of chemistry from Vanderbilt University as well as a master's in chemistry from Georgia Tech.
Okay. And so were you asked to examine some articles of clothing in this case?
Yes, it was requested that I examine, it looks like 4 articles of clothing in this case.
Okay. And were you able to actually do the testing needed on those and create a report with the findings of your testing?
I performed testing on 3 of the 4 exhibits that were submitted.
Okay. And did you put your findings in a report?
I did, yes.
I can approach Ryan. All right. Do you recognize what I'm showing you here?
Yes, this appears to be a copy of my microanalysis report dated January 17th, 2020.
Great. And is this a fair and accurate copy of the report that you generated in this case?
Yes.
And if we could have this
Mark it and file it as Exhibit 42.
Okay, now before we get into the specific findings in this case, I want to just kind of back up just a little bit. If you could just talk just a little bit about what is gunshot residue?
So gunshot residue generally refers to residues that are produced when a firearm is fired. So for gunshot primer residue, it's specifically talking about the residues that come from the primer on the back of the cartridge or ammunition. So when the trigger is pulled, the first thing that's going to happen is your firing pin or your hammer is going to strike the primer on the back of your cartridge, and that's going to initiate a chemical reaction. It's going to create a very intense flame that's going to then start burning your gunpowder, and that's how you get the reaction that's going to eventually propel your bullet out the barrel. So when that initial reaction happens in the primer, you're going to get chemicals that are common to primers, and they're relatively uniform across different manufacturers. Those chemicals are going to contain antimony, barium, and lead. When they burn, you're going to get those chemicals turning into a gas, very hot, expanding rapidly. And so they're going to try to force their way out of the weapon any place they can, any little non-airtight gaps. So you're going to have a lot that are going to go out the barrel, but you're also going to have them escaping through, if it's a pistol, like your ejection port, or out the magazine well, through gaps around the trigger. If it's something like a revolver, you have large gaps around the cylinder where those gases can escape. And so when they escape the weapon, they're going to move out in the area around where the firearm was discharged, and they're going to expand and cool very rapidly. When this happens, you're going to get these gases are going to condense all the way from a gas down to a solid. And when they do that, they're going to form these rounded shapes as they move from solid to liquid, or gas to liquid to solid. And so you're going to have these small microscopic rounded particles that are going to be distributed and falling out of the air in the area around where the gun was just discharged. We consider those rounded particles containing the elements antimony, barium, and lead to be primer gunshot residue particles.
And again, just to be clear, I mean, talked about a lot that goes on whenever a gun is fired. This is not something that can be seen with the naked eye, though. You can't see gunshot residue on a person with the naked eye. Is that correct?
That's correct. These residues that we're looking at aren't like soot or partially burnt powder. These are small microscopic particles, generally on the order of a few nanometers. So, for instance, the width of a human hair, you can line up somewhere on the order of 60 to 80 of these particles along the width of a human hair to give you an idea of the size of these particles.
And so if you are doing a test on, say, an article of clothing or hands or something to that effect, and you find gunshot residue, what would that reveal? So
finding gunshot residue on hands, item of clothing, is an indication that that item, it tells us that they have gunshot residue on that item. What's up for debate is how those residues got there, and there are a few ways that residues can come from a firearm and end up on the hands or an item. It can be from firing a weapon. It can be from, like we said, those particles are condensing in the area around where a weapon was fired. So if you were near a weapon that was fired, or if you handled a weapon that had gunshot residue on it because it had been fired, or came in contact with a source of gunshot residue, they can be transferred in that way, like through handling a weapon. So those are the three main ways that we talk about of how gunshot residue could end up on someone's hands or clothing.
And so, just to make sure that I'm clear on it, let's say that we're dealing with a situation where we're in an enclosed space. Could the presence of gunshot residue indicate that a person was just in that room when a gun was shot?
Yes, the presence of gunshot residue could indicate that that person was just near a gun when it discharged.
And not necessarily that they did the shooting but were in pretty close proximity, is that correct?
Yes, they could have never handled the weapon, and if they're in relatively close proximity, say generally we talk 5 to 6 feet or kind of downrange of the weapon, they could have those gunshot residues on them without ever handling the weapon.
Could there also be transference of gunshot residue from one person to another? Say, if a person had it on their clothing and hugged another person or picked up another person, could that also be a way in which gunshot residue could end up on someone's clothing?
Yes, these particles do not permanently adhere when they settle onto an object or clothing or someone's hands. They will be lost through transfers over time and when they come in contact with other things.
And so, does the presence of gunshot residue, is there any way for you to determine the distance in which a gun was fired or from a victim or anything like that? Does gunshot residue tell us anything like that?
No, primer gunshot residue does not give an indication of distance of firing or type of weapon used.
So I want to just talk a little bit about the specific testing procedure that you used in this case, okay? Could you just kind of walk the jury through what it is that you do when you get an article of clothing or you get samples from a hand or something like that to test?
When I get an article of clothing for testing, the first thing I'll do is, after pulling the evidence, is clean my workspace thoroughly, put out fresh paper, and open that evidence to collect the potential residues from the clothing. Our analysis is not looking directly at the clothing, it's going to look at samples that we take from the clothing. So once I have the clothing out and have it documented, we use small aluminum stubs. So it's an aluminum disc that's about the size of, say, a dime with an adhesive tab on it. So I can take that stub, and if it were, say, my suit jacket, I would tab along the front of the garment, essentially covering the entire front of the garment with those little presses. And that adhesive is going to pick up those residues if they're present on the garment. After collection, I can take that stub to a specialized microscope that's going to allow me to look at both the shape, like we talked about, where they've condensed from a vapor, so they're going to have a rounded shape. So it's going to let me see the shape, but it's also going to let me look at the elements that make up that particle. So I can see that it has the correct, if it has the correct shape and it has that antimony, barium, and lead, then I'm able to call that a particle of primer gunshot residue.
Now, in this case in particular, you said that you received 4 items of clothing, is that right?
That's correct.
And you said you only tested 3 of those. We'll get into that 4th piece. But on the 3 that were tested, were you able to find gunshot residue?
Yes, I found gunshot residue on what the TBI's exhibits 1A, 1B, and 2A.
Okay. Let's break those down for just a second. Looks like 1A says that it's a gray Nike Child's T-shirt. Do you recognize this bag at all?
Yes, if you flip it around, so it's got the the lab assigned case number for this case. It has a label with Exhibit 1, as well as I have my personal markings on it with the case number, the exhibit numbers that were in this bag, so 1A and B, my initials, and the date. And then these seals here are evidence tape with my initials across them.
Okay, so this is, we're looking at what's on your report as Exhibit A and I think B too, because this contains the shorts as well.
Yes,
right?
this is 1A and 1B.
And then we're looking at what's already been admitted as Exhibit 37. I just want to make sure there's also what looks like some GSR testing kits in here. Do you recognize these?
Yes, so these would have been the stubs that I tested as part of my, that I collected with and then examined under the microscope. This one, labeled with the case number, and Exhibit 1A and B would be the stubs that I collected from the articles of clothing. And then this other would be the negative controls that I created and tested as part of this case. As part of our testing process, we take a stub and don't let it come into contact with any of the evidence from this case. It goes through all of the processes that we would to examine sample stubs to ensure that we don't have any source of contamination within our laboratory or any of our testing processes.
I also want to show you what has already been admitted as 38, exhibit number 38. Again, do you recognize the same sort of markings that you were talking about on exhibit 37?
I do, yes. So it has all of the same markings that I discussed on the previous exhibit, and this is marked as the lab's exhibit 2.
Okay, and this on your report is listed as a black and white dress, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, and so exhibit 37 here, this first bag, listed as a gray Nike Child's T-shirt and size 4T black shorts that we now know came from Gavin, the 2-year-old Gavin, and then exhibit 38 here is the dress worn by Robin Howington. Those were the 3 items that you tested, is that correct?
That's correct.
And did you find the presence of gunshot residue on those 3 items?
I did, yes.
Okay, and so again, just so that we're all clear, the presence of gunshot residue, that cannot tell us who shot a gun. Is that right? Is that an accurate statement?
That's an accurate representation.
Okay, but it can tell us that when a gun was shot, that these individuals were probably in pretty close proximity. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
So being in close proximity is one of the ways that these particles could be deposited. Again, physical contact with a source of gunshot primer residue is an additional. My testing of those 3 major ways can't distinguish which.
And can your testing find whether or not there's more gunshot residue on one person versus another, one article of clothing versus another, anything like that?
There's not any scientific basis for assigning extra weight to finding more particles on one person or another, trying to assign, shooter versus bystander. For gunshot residue, the testing is really to the point of whether it's present or not.
Now, briefly, I just kind of want to talk a little bit about when we're talking about clothing, gunshot residue on clothing versus gunshot residue on a person's hands, for example. Does gunshot residue on clothing last longer typically, or vice versa?
So on the hands, gunshot residues are deposited into the oils that our skin naturally produces. That's where they kind of stick. But those oils are constantly lost through touching objects, through just your natural oil production of your hands. They're constantly getting replaced. So they last significantly, they last a shorter amount of time on skin than on clothing. Something as simple as washing your hands would completely remove gunshot residues from your hands. Whereas with clothing, typically gunshot residues are considered to remain on that clothing until it's washed.
And is there a certain amount of time after, say, a shooting takes place where you typically wouldn't expect to find gunshot residue on a person's hands?
The rule of thumb that I normally go with is after around 8 hours, I am not expecting to find gunshot residue on someone's hands. There are labs out there that will not test kits from an individual's hands if they were collected more than 4 hours after the incident.
I want to just, last thing is I want to talk about this 4th article of clothing that you received. And you've got it listed as Exhibit 3A here on your report. And it states that it's Destiny Oliver's clothing. Now, did you test that clothing?
I did not test Destiny Oliver's clothing. It was indicated to me that Destiny was the victim of a gunshot, in which case she's been associated with the discharge of a firearm, and that is all that that primer gunshot residue testing would have been able to say anyway. So doing the testing would not have provided any additional information to the case.
And so just to make sure that I'm understanding it, essentially because we already knew that she was the victim of a gunshot wound, there would be really no need for testing to see whether or not there was gunshot residue on her clothing?
That's correct.
I'll pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Agent.
Good afternoon.
You doing all right up there?
I am.
Okay. And one of the reasons not to test Destiny's clothing is you would expect to find gunshot residue.
Yes, I would.
And so the contact, if someone was lending aid to or comfort to Destiny, that certainly could have been a transfer by contact of GSR, right?
Yes, if someone is coming in contact with someone who has been shot, especially if they're contacting them in any area around the gunshot, I would expect transfer.
Holding a pressure bandage or something holding pressure over a wound would transfer?
Yes, I would expect that would transfer it to someone's hands. Yes.
And you were not asked to look at the hand, or you were not asked to do any testing related to the hands of anybody in this case, right?
No, as far as I know, no kits from hands were submitted.
Thank you, Agent. Have a good day.
Anything further, General?
No.
You are free to go. Have a safe trip back. All right, anybody need a break? I see some heads nodding. Okay. We're gonna take about a 10-minute recess. Everybody stretch your legs. Don't discuss the case. All rise for the jury. You ready, Mr. Whalen?
Yes, Your Honor. I'm now talking about calling investigator Wardwell this afternoon, so I don't know about getting through both sides of investigator Wardwell.
I think if we're not gonna get to Wardlaw.
What does he add that?
I'd like to let him leave, we've gotta put in the phones, we've got evidence that we have to put in.
Okay.
But if we're not gonna get to him today, I don't want him sitting out here all day. So if you could, and he's on night shift tonight, so if we're not gonna get to him today, I'd like to just let him go ahead and go and tell him that we're
Well,
gonna call him first thing in the morning.
I'm not clairvoyant. Who's your next witness?
We've got, the firearms expert, then I have Phyllis Tonkin that has 2 videos that we're gonna play with her, then we have Terry Pate who has, jury out hearing that we're gonna have to do. So I don't think that there's any way we're gonna get to him anyway, but I didn't want to tell him he could go if the court was.
No, I mean, I don't want him sitting here, but I don't want to zip through 3 straight witnesses, and at 4:15, you're saying that you're out of witnesses. But I mean, realistically, if we've got the firearms person, and then who's the next person?
Investigator Tonkin.
I'm sorry, who? Oh, Phyllis, okay, and then, Investigator Pate. I mean, in all likelihood, we're probably not getting to him.
Can we let him go now?
Yeah, we'll just start with him tomorrow. Can we get all the proof in and through tomorrow? Are we gonna be done with the proof, you think?
Unless the defense has a lot of witnesses. We'll be done with the state's case tomorrow.
All right.
I don't know.
You think we won't get to suppression hearing tomorrow afternoon with that lockjaw? That's with me too.
That is the one ray of sunshine I have that we're still gonna be trying this case is I won't be entertained by Mr. Jolly tomorrow afternoon.
My life's been up here for the last 3 months.
Okay.
Maybe we do that lunchtime. Oh, no, that's gonna be every bit of half a day.
You can do it at lunchtime, I'm not. All right, get the jury lined up. All rise for the jury. All right, everyone may have a seat. Waive the call for the state. For the defense. General, call your next witness.
The state calls Lad Kuykendall.
If you would come around and before you take the witness stand, please raise your right hand and be sworn. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Have a seat, please. If you need to adjust the microphone, do so.
Good afternoon. Would you please state and spell your name for the court reporter?
Yes, my name is Ladd, L-A-D-D, Kuykendall, K-U-Y-K-E-N-D-A-L-L.
And where do you currently work?
I'm employed at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, specifically within their forensic division.
And what do you do at TBI?
I'm a special agent, forensic scientist, specifically in their firearms and toolmark identification unit.
How long have you been employed at TBI?
Just over 10 years.
And could you tell the jury a little bit about your education and background as it deals with firearms and toolmark identification?
And Judge, once again, we will stipulate his qualifications.
Same instructions, ladies and gentlemen. The parties agree this witness is an expert in the field or forensic firearm and tool mark identification. The rules of evidence permit him to offer opinion testimony. Go ahead.
And I know that we've stipulated that you are an expert in the field. However, if you wouldn't mind just giving us a short, brief background on your education.
Yes, in May of 2013, I received a BS degree in biology with a minor in chemistry. And under my employment at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, I underwent an extensive 2-year training program specifically for firearms and tool mark identification.
In your time at TBI, how many firearms would you say that you've tested?
Hundreds, if not thousands.
And I want to talk specifically about what you did in this case. Did you examine a firearm and some casings and bullets that were recovered from the firearm in this particular case?
I did.
And were you able to put the results of your examination into a report?
I did.
Recognize what I'm showing you here?
I do recognize this as a copy of my official report.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of the report that you generated in this case?
It is, yes.
Yeah, if we could have this marked as the next one.
That'll be marked and filed as number 43.
Okay, so before we get into the specific results of your testing in this particular case, can you just describe for the jury when you receive a firearm for testing, as you did in this particular case, what is it exactly that you're doing with the gun, with the firearm? What are you looking for, I guess?
Yes. So in general, in the Firearms and Tool Mark Identification Unit, what we're trying to do is find if a fired ammunition component, such as bullets or cartridge cases, were fired from a particular firearm. When I receive a firearm as evidence, I'm going to make sure that it is first unloaded and safe to handle, and I'm going to make sure that it's in normal operating condition with any safety features functioning.
And so when you say that you're looking for similarities, things like that, when a gun is fired, does it leave any sort of markings or anything like that on the casings and or the bullet?
Yes, it does. And we do break this down into 2 sets of characteristics, if you will. The first would be class characteristics. This is the blueprint of the gun. The caliber, the shape of the firing pin, whether it's hemispherical or rectangular, the rifling pattern. This is the raised and depressed area within the barrel that's set at a certain twist, whether right hand or left hand, and that's what imparts a spin on the bullet, and that's what makes the bullet stable in flight. All those things are predetermined by the manufacturer, so I look for those things to see if they agree. Say I have a firearm, it has 6 right rifling, it is 9mm caliber. I look on a bullet if I receive it as evidence, and I see 6 land, 6 groove impressions set at a right hand twist, and I measure it and it is consistent with 9mm caliber. Those all have the same class characteristics. That's not unique to a particular gun. That's unique to a set of guns made by a manufacturer. What I'm looking for after that, if all these class characteristics match, I'm looking for individual characteristics which are unique to that firearm. It's a mechanical fingerprint, if you will. So during the firing process, a gun can impart unique incidental markings to bullets and cartridge cases. So that rifling I mentioned earlier, it cuts into the bullet and it can leave what we call stria, which are just scratch marks. These are unique to that barrel. And then on the firing pin, there can be unique marks that can be impressed onto the cartridge case. And the breech face, that's the area of the slide that surrounds the firing pin, can also impart marks onto the cartridge case. I evaluate all these things on a microscopic level. I use a microscope to compare test-fired cartridge cases that I know came from the gun, so all the markings that are on those cartridge cases and on the bullets, I know came from the gun. I look at those marks and compare them to the marks that are on the evidence from the scene. And if I see the level of agreement that I see between things that I know came from the gun to the evidence, then I can identify or make the conclusion that that ammunition component was fired from the gun.
And so, I guess just to make sure that I'm understanding, whenever a weapon is fired,
Yes.
You're talking about those lines and things that it's leaving. If that same weapon is fired again, would you expect to see the same sort of lines on the second bullet as the first?
Yes, there has to be a level of reproducibility in order to make an identification. And this is what we see. I generally test fire at least 4 bullets in at least 4 cartridge cases to see if these marks are reproducing one test fire from another. And if there are more tests that need to be done, I'll shoot as many as need be. But yes, I do expect these firearms to reproduce these marks if they're there.
Okay. And so in this case in particular, you were provided with a weapon. Do you recall what kind of weapon that was?
I do recall it being a 9mm pistol of Taurus make, I believe.
Does this box look familiar to you? It's already been admitted as exhibit number 27. Do you recognize that box?
I do recognize it, yes.
Is this the box that you received in this case that contained the firearm that was found on the scene?
It does appear to be. It has my laboratory markings in my handwriting, my initials, and the exhibit numbers on it.
Okay. So when you first get a weapon, I believe you testified a little while ago that you will check it to make sure that everything's functioning properly. Is that correct?
Yes, I will make sure it's in normal operating condition.
And did you do that in this particular case?
I did.
And what were your results?
That it was functioning normally as expected, and the safety features were functioning as well.
Okay, so I want to talk specifically about these safety features on this particular gun. I'm going to ask you to take that out if you don't
Sure.
mind. So, get some gloves if you want to use that.
Okay.
Because I'm going to ask you to step down and just demonstrate where specifically the safety features on this gun.
Would you also like me to explain the cycle of fire of this as well?
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
Still clear?
Yes, sir. Would you like to see it?
Take your word for it.
And just to be clear, I also see the laboratory markings, exhibit number, and my initials that I etched onto the gun magazine. So I do believe I am handling the firearm that I work in this case. This is a Taurus model PT-111 Millennial G2. It's a long name. This is a semi-automatic 9mm pistol. And I'm going to show you in general how this is supposed to operate. There are a few basic core steps in order to operate this weapon. So you have a magazine. It is a detachable separate magazine that you would load the cartridges, unfired ammunition, into the magazine. Once this is loaded, you will then insert it into the bottom of the grill. That is loading the gun. Now to feed a cartridge into the slide, you will have to pull this to the rear and allow it to go forward. That's what's going to strip that first piece of unfired ammunition into the chamber. It is now ready to be fired. Pulling the trigger, you heard that releases the firing pin, that detonates the cartridge within, fires the bullet this way. Now, how this all operates is a short recoil operated system. What that means is if you fired a gun, that kick that you experience, that's called recoil. That's the energy from the detonation of this cartridge. That's what operates this slide. So that energy from the shot will then force the slide backwards to the rear, automatically extracting and ejecting the cartridge case, the fire cartridge case within the chamber, out. It will also then go back forward once it reaches all the way to the rear. There's a big spring that forces it back home like you just saw. Now a new unfired piece of ammunition is in the chamber ready to be fired, and a pull the trigger only fires one at a time in a semi-automatic operated pistol like this one. So this has a couple of different safety features. The first that you can see is on the left-hand side of the pistol. It's what I would call a left-handed manual lever safety. You have to manually flip this safety up. And what this does is it actually seizes the trigger and it cannot be pulled. So now I cannot pull it any further than what I'm doing now. So it's not releasing the firearm pin, so it would not fire. This safety has to be disengaged before firing. There's another one called a force security system. This is a lock and key. You see this small circle on the top of the slide? There's a key that you can insert and twist, and it will actually lock up, it will seize up the trigger in the back in the connection to the firing pin. It will not fire if that's locked. In this case, it came unlocked. The safety does function, though. I have a key, and I used it in this case. Now, there are two other safeties that are defeated by the pull of the trigger. The first, and you see on top of the trigger shoe, which is this plastic piece right here, there is a thin piece of plastic called the trigger safety. This prevents the trigger from being pulled if it's not pressed. So if something accidentally gets within the trigger guard and hits the side of the trigger can't be pulled unless you depress that very thin piece of plastic in the middle. Once you do that, now it can actually go into the trigger guard all the way. You can pull the trigger. The last safety that you will, you can't really see, but it's on the inside here. I'm going to flip this around. Maybe you'll be able to see it. I don't think you can. Yeah, you can't see it in this one. But it's on the underside of the slide. It's called a firing pin safety. This is what prevents the firing pin from coming forward and striking anything in the chamber. The only way that it's defeated is by pulling the trigger. How this is a safety, if it's dropped, the trigger goes backwards. It doesn't go backwards. The firing pin does not disengage from the sear. It doesn't detonate what's in the chamber. So it is a safety from that point of view, but it is defeated with the pull of the trigger. There is one more safety feature that does not keep the firearm from being fired, and it is a loaded chamber indicator. It is on the very top. So if something is within the chamber, it lifts up and you can see that little red line. It just lets you know that it's loaded. This does not keep the firearm from being fired. So those are all the safety features on this pistol.
Thank you. You can return back up there. So I do not know a lot about firearms, so I apologize, but I'm going to ask you a couple things just to make sure that I am understanding what you just explained. So the safety on the side, you're saying that that has to manually be flipped up before the gun can be fired, correct?
So it would be flipped down. If it were
Flipped down.
flipped up, it's in safe. And so when you look at it again, I'm going to handle this without gloves. I apologize. But you can see a red dot on the side. If that's exposed, it's ready to be fired. If it's flipped up and covered, if you don't see the red dot, it is now unsafe.
Okay. And so that has to be flipped. You have to actually physically cock the gun to get the bullet to go up into the chamber. And I'm talking about before you can actually fire a first shot out of it.
Yes, you would have to feed a cartridge into the chamber by pulling the slide all the way back and releasing it. Yes.
Okay. And then the third kind of component is that the trigger would need to be pulled because of that last safety that you talked about,
Yes,
correct?
those last two safeties would be defeated by the pull of the trigger, yes.
Okay, and so that last safety again is just to make sure that if a gun is dropped, that it's not going off unless, without somebody actually pulling the trigger. Is that
That's correct.
way to say that? Okay. And so all of those safeties on this particular gun, you stated they worked correctly as far as you could tell?
They did.
Okay. So I also want to talk about when you received this gun, did you receive anything other than the firearm itself?
Yes, I did. So within this box,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yes.
I just want to make sure that there's-
Yes. So within this box, I also received 4 unfired pieces of ammunition, or 4 cartridges, and then I received 1 fired cartridge case.
And so when you say unspent, I think is the way that it's listed on that envelope there. Is that the bullets that were in the magazine that were in the gun? Is that what that means, where it says unspent bullets?
Yes, those
Okay.
unfired cartridges were from the magazine.
Okay.
Yes.
And so now I want to get down specifically to the report that you made in this particular case, the testing that you did on this weapon, okay? And so you tested the shell casing that you received. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
And when we're talking about the shell casing, are we talking about the shell casing that was the spent shell casing that was actually found lodged in the gun?
It was reported to be within the firearm in some capacity. That was noted. When I received it, it was separate from the firearm, but that was noted, and that is the cartridge case. That is the fired cartridge case that I did examine in this case.
And when you did your testing, what, if anything, did you figure out about that casing versus any other casings from the gun?
So through my testing, the visual inspection and then microscopic examination of test-fired cartridge cases from this particular firearm in conjunction with the fired cartridge case submitted in the same package, I was able to determine that that cartridge case from the scene was fired in this pistol.
Were you also provided a bullet? Not the 4 that were in the magazine, but a separate one. I believe you've got it listed as 5A on your report, as one fired bullet from couch pillow.
Yes.
And were you able to examine that bullet in comparison with this firearm?
Yes, I was. I was able to determine that it shared the same class characteristics, meaning that it was the same general caliber. It had impressions of the same rifling pattern within the barrel, and it did have similar individual marks that looked very similar to test-fired bullets that I'd gotten from this gun. However, the surface of this bullet had changed just enough. It was slightly damaged. I was not able to make a definitive determination on whether or not it was fired from this particular gun.
And when you say that the bullet was damaged, could that be caused by entering, exiting a body, or hitting a hard surface, anything like that?
If it makes impact with anything semi-solid, solid, it can absolutely have an effect on the bullet and its condition.
What about a remote control?
I could see that damaging a bullet as well.
And what about if it makes multiple entries in one person's body? For example, if it goes through a hand, out a hand, and a chest, out a back. Would that be another thing that could cause the damaging to the bullet?
It could, yes.
And so because of this damage to the bullet that was found in the couch pillow, you're not able to definitively say that it matches the bullets in the gun, but you can say that it had similarities and the same class, I believe you called it?
Yes, it had the same class, meaning a firearm very much like this with the same caliber, same rifling pattern, had made these marks. However, those microscopic marks left behind by the gun have been slightly damaged enough where I can't tell one way or another if it were fired from this gun.
Now, I also want to talk about the fact you were provided with what's marked on your report here as Exhibit 3A, and it's one white Justice brand tank top from Destiny Oliver. And you talk a little bit in your report about, you did a visual examination of that shirt. Can you just explain to the jury what you did with that?
Yes. One of the other testings that is performed within my unit at TBI would be a muzzle to garment distance determination. And this is an approximate distance that can be determined from the end of the muzzle or the end of the barrel to whatever is fired upon. Usually in the cases that we work, they're articles of clothing someone was wearing. So it would be the general distance between those two. So how this is done is it's visually inspected first to see if there are any holes that look like bullet holes or bullet entries or exits. And I will visually and microscopically look at these bullet holes to see if there are gunshot residues around that hole. If there is, there are chemical tests that I can perform to enhance and to see those particles. If they form a distinct pattern, meaning much like if you spray a spray can, you know that it comes out in almost a circular pattern, not too dissimilar to what the gun will do with gunshot residue. So once that pattern, if it's actually developed, I can look at that and then make test patterns with the firearm and like ammunition at known distances so that I can make a pattern at contact. I can make one at 1 foot, 2 foot, all the way out to 6 feet, and then compare those patterns to the one that I developed on the shirt to see generally how far away this pattern looks based on my knowns. And in this case, when I did my testing and after visual, microscopic, and chemical testing, there were gunshot residues present. However, it did not form a distinct pattern, and therefore I could not come up with a distinct or a definitive distance at which this shot could have been fired.
And when you're talking in your report, you reference a hole A on the t-shirt, and that would be in the upper mid-chest area. And then you also reference a hole B, which is on the upper left back area. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, and so when you're saying there was not a distinct pattern of gunshot residue, you're talking about on the front of the shirt and the back of the shirt, correct?
So when I'm specifically talking about the results I just had mentioned, I should have distinguished those two. So hole A on the front, I did find gunshot residue there, but that did not form a distinct pattern. On the back, I did find residues that were consistent with the passage of a bullet, but it wasn't as if it were fired upon there. So hole A had more gunshot residue here, and there were residues on the back, hole B, but there were very few there, and there was definitely no pattern on the back.
And so would the lack of a pattern, or could the lack of a pattern be caused if the bullet passed through the victim's hand first before entering her chest?
There are many reasons why a pattern may not form, and an intervening object such as a body part like a hand can absolutely affect the deposit of a pattern, because it blocks that GSR or the gunshot residue from depositing on the shirt. So anything in between the muzzle and its final, I don't want to say target, but whatever it hits, if there's anything in between it, that GSR can be picked up by that intervening object.
I want to talk now about some specifications of this particular gun. Can you tell us about how much pressure it takes to pull that trigger on that gun?
So a part of the normal function testing of firearms, we do record the trigger weight, meaning in pounds, how many pounds of pressure it will take to pull the trigger far enough to release the firing pin. In this case, and this is a unique gun in that it has a unique feature called a double strike or a second strike feature. And all that means is that if the slide is racked, now the firing pin is connected to the trigger, and all the trigger will do is release the firing pin. That trigger weight is, as I recorded it, it was 5 pounds and 5/8. So just a little over 5.5 pounds of pressure to pull the trigger in that mode. Now, the reason why Taurus did this, at least explained on their website, was that say the cartridge within the chamber doesn't go off and you don't have time to re-rack the slide, you can pull the trigger again, and there's a mechanism that when you pull the trigger now, it actually reconnects that firing pin with the trigger and then releases. So it's a double action in that it cocks and then releases the firing pin. That trigger pull is slightly heavier because it's doing an additional function within the gun. So it's around 6.5 pounds of pressure there. So if the slide is racked, a little over 5.5. If it's not, 6.5.
But just to be clear, let's say that this was the first time that gun was ever being fired. Before that initial bullet comes out, it would have to be racked.
It would have to be racked, yes.
Okay. And can you tell us about actually racking a gun? Is there any sort of pressure or strength or anything like that that's required to physically rack the gun?
So typically, in order to what we call rack the gun or to pull this slide to the rear, it's pretty taut. There's a very big spring. It's called the recoil spring, and it has a couple of functions. But basically, what its main function is to pull that slide back to home and locked in so that you can now pull the trigger. That takes a decent amount of force to be able to do. And I will say it does take some practice and some dexterity to be able to grab the slide and to proficiently pull the slide back and release it. Now, again, that's not something I do as a firearms examiner. I don't teach people how to do that. However, because I am a special agent and I do qualify every year with firearms, that is training that we go through. They do train you in how to properly operate semi-automatic pistols. We don't use this exact one, but it's very similar. So I can speak to that, yes, it does take a little bit of training in order to proficiently rack the slide in order to load it and fire it.
Now, during the course of this case, were you also able to do some independent research regarding the ability of maybe small children to fire these sorts of handguns?
I was requested to see if there was any research on that topic, and I found one article that does refer to small children and women and their ability to pull certain poundages of trigger pulls.
And specifically this article, can you tell the jury, did this article deal with 2-year-old children?
From my knowledge in reading it, it did not include, the sample size did not include 2-year-olds. The youngest was 3-year-olds.
And in that study, what was the percentage of 3 and 4-year-olds that would be able to pull the trigger of some sort of firearm? I'm not sure if the study actually...
It did say the
delineated.
poundage. So between 3 and 4-year-olds, from what the study has said, was that 25% of these children in that age range had the ability to use 2 fingers to pull the trigger weight of about 10 pounds. So anything 10 pounds and less, 25% of these children were able to use 2 fingers to depress the trigger.
But again, this study, was this the only one that you could find?
This is the only one I could find, and that this is not a study or test that we perform at the TBI.
And that study, again, it did not focus on 2-year-old children. It only looked at as young as 3 and 4. Is that right?
As young as 3 and 4 on up into other ages, yes.
Okay. And so, in your expert opinion, the particular firearm in this case, do you believe that it would be possible for a 2-year-old to fire this weapon?
It can be possible, and again, I must qualify with these are not tests that we perform at the TBI, and I can only say it's possible.
Do you think that it would be difficult at all?
I'm going to object anything further. He said he doesn't do those.
I think he's gone as far as he can go, sustained.
So, in this dealing with this particular gun, let's say a 2-year-old did get this weapon. What would they have to do in order to fire it?
That depends on how they find it, to be honest. So if they found it loaded and the safety was off, all they would have to do is pull the trigger. If it was unloaded, then they would have to load it themselves. They'd have to rack the slide in order to do that. If the safety was engaged, they'd have to disengage that manual lever safety or take the key and unlock it if it were locked that way. But again, there's any combination of those things that they would have to do if they were to try to fire the firearm.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Agent Kuykendall. You doing okay up there?
Doing well, thank you.
If you need some water or something, shout.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Let me, says the man who needs water. Yeah, I'm fine. You got me. This one study you found starts with, it has groupings of ages, right?
It does.
It says 3 to 4-year-olds, 5 to 6-year-olds, 7 to 8-year-olds, right?
That is correct.
So if we're talking about a 2.5-year-old, 2.5-year-olds are not listed, 2-year-olds are.
Yeah, anything less than 3 was not listed.
Right. So, and this is at a low end on the trigger pull, right?
On this particular firearm, it's about typical. It's around 5 pounds is typical for most pistols. It can be a little heavier. Any lower, that's usually a performance trigger, meaning it's lighter, so it's easier to pull.
And while that was only one study, you're aware of what goes on in the world, right? The world with guns.
Could you clarify?
If I tell you that have you read newspaper articles, seen reports on television about small children of that age getting a hold of a pistol, shooting themselves or someone else in an accident? You heard of that?
I've heard of cases, yes,
Tragically, right?
tragically.
Now, listen, we talked a little bit when we were doing jury selection with folks about their own usage of guns and keeping of guns. If this gun was found by a child, loaded and with the safety off, all they have to do is pull that trigger to fire it.
That is correct, yes.
The most safety conscious of gun owners would keep a safety on. Should keep a safety on.
It just depends on how they want to keep the gun, if it's going to be ready.
A lot of people don't keep the safety on, do they?
I can't testify to that.
But those small children who got hold of guns and fired them likely did not load a magazine, rack a pistol, and then pull a trigger.
It's hard to say. I can't recall any specific situations.
Thank you, Agent. Have a good trip home.
Anything further? You are free to go. Have a safe trip back to Nashville. Call your next witness.
State calls Detective Phil Tonkin.
You solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Have a seat, please.
Can you introduce yourself to the jury, please?
Yes, my name is Phyllis Tonkin.
And can you spell your first and last name for our court reporter?
PhyllisTonkin.
And where are you currently employed?
Knoxville Police Department.
What do you do now?
Currently working in the Office of Professional Standards.
Okay. Prior to working in the Office of Professional Standards, did you work in a different capacity at KPD?
Yes, ma'am.
Where was that?
I've been with the department for 22 years. The first 16 and a half years I worked in special crimes. We did investigations with domestic, elder, human trafficking, missing persons, and child abuse. And then I went to internet crimes against children.
Okay. And so in September of 2019, where were you? Which role did you have?
I would be working in the special crimes unit.
Okay. And so what was your title in the special crimes unit?
Investigator.
Okay. And you said that you did that for about, did you say 14 years?
About 16 and a half
16 years. Okay. Do you recall if on September 14th of 2019 you became involved in a case involving Robin Howington?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And tell the jury briefly how you became involved in this case.
There was a call that came in, and it involved a child that had been shot. I went to the scene with Investigator Riddle, and I assisted him with that case.
Okay. And so the reason that you were involved in the case is that because there was a child victim?
Correct.
Okay. And so major crimes handles homicides, but in this case, since the victim that was deceased was a child, then you become involved as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And is there also somebody with the Department of Children's Services who is assisting as well?
Yes.
Okay. And do you and the Department of Children's Services kind of work in tandem on these types of cases?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So you said that you were involved there initially at the scene.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you recall if you were involved at all with speaking to Ms. Howington at the scene before she went to the hospital?
Not at the scene.
Okay. Did you travel to the hospital and speak with her at the hospital?
I don't believe so.
You're aware that she went to the hospital, though, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And thereafter, she was brought to the Knoxville Police Department to be interviewed, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So when she was brought to the Knoxville Police Department, the interview that was done, that started with Detective Riddle and Brendan Wardlaw, is that correct?
Correct.
And what was your role in this particular interview?
This particular interview, I was with the Department of Children's Services. I did ask some questions in regards to the domestic violence that Ms. Howington was involved in, and then the majority of the conversation was with the Department of Children's Services asking questions.
Okay. And so, just so the jury's clear on the timeline, the initial statements that the defendant gave to Investigator Riddle and Investigator Wardlaw, you were not present in the room for those initial statements?
Correct.
Okay. But at some point in time, you got called in and spoke to Ms. Howington, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall whether or not DCS came with you into the room when you spoke to Ms. Howington?
They did.
Okay. And was that interview that you did with Ms. Howington, was that something that was recorded?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And again, just so that we're clear, the first set of statements that Ms. Howington did, that was before you even got in the room, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so when you talked to her, that's kind of after she's talked to these investigators for a while, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Let me, if I could have the projector. Did you put it in already?
This is Phil Stonkin.
Okay. Do you recognize the image that's on the screen right now?
Yes.
And is that, tell the jury what that is.
This is the interview on the interview room on the third floor of the Knoxville Police Department.
Okay. And there are 3 people in this interview room, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Are you the one at the top?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so you have become involved in this case as far as interacting with Ms. Howington, it looks like at 1:53 on the 15th, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, we'd ask to make this the next exhibit and publish this to the jury.
All right, make this exhibit 44 would be Investigator Tonkin's interview of Ms. Howington.
We can have the lights.
This is Phil Stonkin. She works in the domestic violence unit. She does this for a living. She's good at this. She does great at it. She's going to talk to you a little bit about her.
The person that just walked into the room, who is that?
Alicia Weaver with the
With
Department of Children
Services?
with the Department of Children's Services.
Violence side of things. And this is a lady from DCS, and she's going to talk to you as well. Okay, I told you other agencies are involved. Then they may ask you some personal issues, and I'll stay out of it. Okay.
Ms. Robin, my name is Phyllis, and I work in the special crimes unit. I'm sorry about your loss. This is Alicia, she works with DCS. We're gonna have to ask you some pretty hard questions. But all I want you to do is just to be honest with me, okay? And I know that you've been through a lot tonight. It's okay.
It's really not my making dead.
But as you know, the other investigators were in here, I know that things have kind of changed as you talk to them, right?
Correct.
So if there's something you need to tell, can I sit down and tell you?
I told the truth.
When he came in, you said that you all had tussled a little bit.
He came been screaming and hollering anyway.
What's he screaming?
Because because Destiny didn't want to talk to him on the phone because on Friday she got a bad report at school and he gives her hell about it. He's a narcissist. He's very hard on her. And when he called today to talk to her, he asked her how she did at school yesterday, and she said bad, and he got to jumping her ass, and she ran out of the room, and me and him got an argument, and I told him that she shouldn't feel like that, and she shouldn't be scared of her day.
So you were in the living room when that happened, or were you in the kitchen?
No, we were on the phone.
You were on the phone. So whenever he came in, where were you all in the house?
I had two living rooms, we were in the middle living room.
Okay. And when you were in the middle, where were you sitting?
I had like a couch, and there's like a footstool thing, and I was sitting on the footstool, she was laying, watching Netflix with TV, and then Gavin was sitting beside me.
You said that you two had gotten into a tussle. Where did you guys tussle at?
In the doorway between the two living rooms.
Okay. And were you in, which living room were you in when you were tussling?
We were in the doorway.
In the doorway.
Correct.
Which side were you? Were you on the one closest to the door?
Yes.
Out?
Yes.
Side? Or
Yes.
were you?
Yes. I was trying to get him to leave.
Okay. And where was the gun at?
It was in the closet.
Okay.
He got me up the stool.
What stool?
There's like those little things like tables with the two little bar stools or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's where they eat at. They don't eat at the table, they eat there in front of the TV.
Okay. So and I work in domestic violence, so I'm trying to figure out if we have any charges against the baby daddy. And I say that because if there was a tussle, I want to know kind of, if you could walk me through your tussle.
Yeah, I was trying to get him to leave, and he was basically fighting me not to.
Okay. So you were
in the first living
room.
In the
first living room. So you're tussling. Tell me what he did to you. Because I was looking to see if you had any injuries.
No.
Do you have any injuries?
I mean, not really. I sprayed tan, so there's probably not anything.
Doesn't that stuff just rub off? No? What about in the rain? Does it just kind of?
Not in races.
I didn't know. Is that normal?
No.
Do you have any marks on your side or anything from where you were tussled? Is that something we might be able to do?
I mean, it was really mainly my arms because, like, I was trying to get him out and he was just trying to hold me and was screaming and hollering, I'm a whore, I don't want to be with him. I got raped by a police officer May 21st, 2019, and I'm about to get a settlement from the city because of it. And ever since he found out about that, being nosy in my house, he's been very persistent about it. And him and the guy I've been talking to got into a fight. Well, they got into a tussle in the yard yesterday. So it's like he's been creeping up on me or, lurking around my house. Stalking me, whatever you want to call it.
So you said tell me exactly what he did when you were in the doorway. What did he do?
He put his hands on me and came
Right
on.
here?
Yes.
Okay. And he just put his hands on you?
Yeah, he put his hands on me and pushed me up against, there was like, the doorway's kind of long, it was like, you're no more, blah, 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 you don't want to be with me, you want to be, he said that black girls have sex with anybody, that he wish he never had a kid with me, he's going to stick to his own race from now on. I mean, he was just screaming and hollering like a nut, basically.
And you tried to push him out?
Yes. Which is not possible because he's way stronger than me. He lifts weights, he's a big one, he's like a health nut. Goes to the gym every day, all that. And I feel like my son was trying to protect this.
Well, and first off, what's interesting is the fact that you say you're trying to push him out, but you're on the outside.
Right. I'm saying, we went back and forth. It wasn't like we were just in one place at one time. Like I said, he actually pushed me up against the wall, everything. Like, it just happened so fast. Like, it seemed like forever, but it really wasn't.
What we'd like to do is just to see if you have any injuries on you. Is that something you could do? Sure. Okay. And then
I know my back is hurting.
So do you recall if you ever took Ms. Howington out and gave her the opportunity to show you any injuries or anything like that?
She did go use the restroom, and there were no injuries.
And what?
No injuries.
There were no injuries?
There was I think a little bruise on her shoulder, but other than that, we did not see any injuries.
So, since you're willing to do that, what we can do is we can go into the restroom and then we'll check and see if you have any bruising from the scuffle from earlier.
This is my back hurt right here.
Okay. We can see if there's anything back, you know, on your back, and then she'll do the screen, and then we'll come back in here. You good with that? Just you get in here for a little bit. You probably need a little break.
That was between us.
What's that?
Between me and Antoine.
Tonight it was. Do you know where that popped off at? No. Do you have any other injuries other than, I mean, just your back is real sore?
Yes.
So if you're wanting to try and get an order of protection, we're at the Family Justice Center, okay? And that's where Alicia's housed out of also. What we can do is come in, we'll talk with one of our advocates, and we can try and get an order.
Right now.
Do you know where he's staying at? Does he have any friends?
I don't know anything about him. All he knows is
You have a baby with
Yeah.
him and you don't know anything about him?
Right. Because he's a very private person.
Detective Tonkin, after this interview that you did with Ms. Howington, do you remember going then back to Balsam Drive with Detective Wardlaw and Detective Riddle and DCS and yourself, where you all kind of did a reenactment? Do you remember that happening?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you remember being in the room with Ms. Howington at some point where it was just the two of you in the room, or maybe the two of you and DCS in the room?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do you recall at this point in time if there had been any mention of a black purse as far as you knew?
Not that I knew.
While you were in the room, did Ms. Howington mention something about a black purse?
She did.
Did you relay that information to Detective Riddle?
I did.
Were you also involved in attempting to interview Gavin, the little 2-year-old in this case?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury about that?
There was we take children to Child Help USA, and they have a forensic interviewer there that is trained to interview children with trauma. They also have expertise in like child abuse investigations. And we did try and so I wasn't in the room. We have a one-way mirror, and myself and the Department of Children's Services sit behind the mirror and watch the interview take place. Gavin went in to the room with the forensic interviewer, who no longer works with DCS, with the Child Help. She attempted to get Gavin to talk to her. He ran to the door, and then she was able to call him back, and then he laid on the floor and took a writing utensil and looked like he was doing something on a piece of paper, and then he gets up. She's still trying to ask him questions, and then he goes back to the door, and that was the end of the interview.
Okay, so there was an attempt made to interview Gavin, is that
Yes.
fair? And he was basically too young to be interviewed.
Correct.
Okay. Let me show you this DVD now. Do you recognize this as a DVD of the child help
Yes.
interview that was attempted on Gavin? He could make this the next exhibit.
Mark and file it as Exhibit 45.
How was this
Why does the jury need to see this? Why does the jury need to see
It
this?
shows the size of this child, it shows how he's interacting with others. This is important for the jury. to
How
see.
long is it?
It is approximately 5 minutes.
All right, play it.
Okay, and so there are 4 different views. Is the purpose of the 4 different views so that people can see the entirety of the room there?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And there's a mirror, a one-way mirror where you can see into the room, but it looks like a mirror from the inside. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you are behind that mirror?
Yes, ma'am.
Hey Gavin, can you tell me how old you are? called you for? Are you done with that one? Oh. Hey, Gavin, can you tell me about your family? Oh, that's pretty. Do you want to talk to me a little bit? Hey, Gavin, do you want to come talk with me?
Unless you're talking as part of your investigation, did you also participate in taking any measurements of little Gavin's size?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And let me show you this and ask you, do you recognize these set of pictures? It's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pictures.
Yes, these are pictures that we took on the day of the forensic interview.
We could make this the next exhibit.
Let those be marked and filed collectively as number 46.
Okay, and so for exhibit number 46, tell the jury, we don't have these on the projectors, so you might just have to stand up and show the jury what it is that we're looking at in these pictures.
This is a picture of Gavin, and this is how tall Gavin is.
How tall is Gavin?
I don't have my meters on here.
Does it accurately reflect how tall he is?
It does.
Okay.
It's about 38.
How tall?
38 inches, is that correct?
Yeah, approximately.
Okay. And then what did you guys do to see how far up Gavin could reach?
We had the tape up, and then we basically had to have some fun, try and have some fun with him, and then we were able to get him to reach.
Does she have like a gummy or a piece of candy or something in her hand?
It looks like she's got a piece of candy in her hand.
Okay. And so she's holding it up for him to reach out to?
Right here.
Okay.
And then the next picture is a picture of Gavin reaching for the piece of candy. Then the last picture shows the length of his arm reach.
And, oh, you got one more.
Yep, and then we have pictures where we drew a picture of his hand.
To show the size of his hand.
Size of his hand.
Okay. We could publish those to the jury. And then this.
What was the reach? What was the measurement on the reach?
I can read it to you. Can you see that?
Probably not.
The jury can see this, Your Honor, but can you read what
About
that says?
45
How
inches.
much?
About 45 inches.
All right, and then I'm gonna hand you this last set of pictures. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do you recognize those?
Yes. This first is a picture of Gavin's hands that we drew.
Okay. And so literally you guys just traced his little hand.
Traced his hand.
Okay. And then the other ones?
Then this is, oh, they're together. So this is a measurement of Gavin's hand. This is a measurement of his left hand. A measurement of his right hand. Another measurement of the right hand. Another measurement of the right hand. And another measurement of the right hand.
You can make this collectively the next exhibit and publish it.
Be 47. And how many total photos or drawings was that?
I think it was 11.
8.
It's on 47,
That was 47. Cross-examination.
Good afternoon.
Sir?
I don't want to get your title wrong.
Investigator?
Investigator. Investigator Tonkin. We've known each other, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about that third floor in the old KPD safe building.
Yes, sir.
We're watching, we're not now, we were watching that video from that was recorded in that room, right?
Yes, sir.
302. And there is a spot on that floor where people can go and watch that interview, right?
Yes.
There's no two-way glass in that room.
That's correct, sir.
You're just watching the same video that we're watching here on the monitor.
Yes, sir.
Right. When did you arrive at KPD that day?
I could not recall when I arrived.
You asked her some questions about some of the things, right when you sat down, you asked her some questions about some of the things she had told Investigator Riddle and Wardlaw, right?
Yes.
Were you down the hall watching that video?
I was not watching all of the video. I don't remember what part, if I watched any. There were a lot of things going on, and so I can't say that I watched every single second, or if I know I didn't watch the whole thing.
But you did see some of it.
I may have seen some of it.
Did you see the part where she told him she'd been raped by a police officer?
No.
Did you see the part where the investigator decides to give her a hug in that room?
No, sir.
Do you remember what was going on in the interview that you did see?
What I did,
Right.
I was sitting there, and the Department of Children's Service was sitting there as well, and she was sitting in front of me.
Do you recall hearing either Wardlaw or Riddle telling Miss Howington, you know, if you say he did it, he's going to have to go through a forensic interview?
No.
Good. So there's only one forensic interview, right?
Yes.
And we just saw
Yes,
an
sir.
attempt at a forensic interview.
Yes, sir.
So that would have been the thing that this child was going to be subjected to.
Yes, sir.
Asking him to color and chasing him around the room because he won't sit down.
He's a 2-year-old.
Right. But during that interview, you were on the third floor of the KPD building.
Yes, that's where the interview took place.
Did you see them go into that room? Did you see Riddle, Wardlaw, and
No.
Ms. Howington go into that room?
No.
Were you on the floor when they went into that room?
I don't know. I don't recall if I was on the floor yet or not.
Did you see either of them walk out of that room, either Wardlaw or Riddle walk out of that room while you were there during their interview?
No.
Had they come and asked you to step into the interview and observe, would you have been okay with that?
To observe the interview?
Yes.
Yes. We step in and do interviews with everybody.
If they had come out and said to you, we got a woman in here who's afraid she was raped a while back by a police officer, she's uncomfortable with the two of us, would you come sit in the room? You'd have done that.
Yes, sir.
And then, when you come into that room, believe Detective Riddle tells her that DCS will come, there will be some private questions that are gonna need to be asked, and he's gonna leave the room, right?
Yes.
So he left the room,
Yes, sir.
and he goes down that hallway, right? Out of the
I
room.
don't know where he went, but yes.
And could easily go to the place where you watch the video from, right?
Where, who?
Where you watch the feed from the interview room.
He could have. I don't know where he went.
But when you sat down there, you start asking questions that are just a whole lot like what was asked in the interview, right?
I was asking domestic violence questions and what happened.
How'd you lose that fingernail? Where was it? Where was he in the room? Where were the two of you in between those rooms? Those kind of questions, right?
Mhm.
That was really just that was an investigative ploy, right? To get you in the room, to have her now, so you can pull your chair up close, get into space and say, tell me what happened. Get the guys out of the room.
I was going in there with the Department of Children's Services and to talk about the domestic violence.
Is that the entirety of that interview?
No, sir.
Does the Department of Children's Service ask any questions in that interview?
Yes, they do.
But not in the department's?
No, correct. There was more questions asked.
And your questions about domestic violence were questions about what happened at 502 Balsam on the night of September the 14th, 2019.
Yes, sir.
The incident.
I'm sorry.
The incident about which this trial is being conducted.
The incident that led up to what this trial was about, yes.
No further questions. Thank you.
Anything further, General?
Can we approach?
Ladies and gentlemen, I need to take up a matter in your absence. Don't discuss the case. All rise for the jury. Everyone may have a seat. Now, what is the issue, General?
Well, Your Honor, in this DCS record that I took out, that they talk about how she's lost her other child through DCS and things of that nature that I wasn't going to play for this jury, but now that Mr. Whalen has said to the jury,
Don't talk over her. Let her talk, and then you'll get your turn.
said to the jury, you know, why are there other portions that haven't been played? I feel like I need to play the rest of this interview that includes where DCS is talking about this other child.
What relevance does that have to this?
It has relevance because the defense attorney is making it to this jury that we've taken out portions of this interview that are important. The state's done something wrong, which we've not done. So I'm happy to play the whole interview.
All right.
I watched a video played here where they talk about this being DCS's opportunity to come in and talk to her, and the only one that talks is Ms. Thompson. And so I asked the question, is this a ploy? Are you just getting back in there just to talk about, get a female in to ask the questions and see if the answers change? I think that's a reasonable question given what they played. I'm looking for I'm pretty sure I had a transcript of that, but I'm not sure because I think there's another interview at the house. if they want to say or have.
Can we both stipulate, if we bring the jury back in here, that the DCS investigator during the course of this interview asked a number of questions of Ms. Howington that the parties agree are not factually germane to this proceeding? Can we agree to stipulate to that announcement?
We can stipulate to that announcement, Judge, and if the state wants to avoid these, they can just tell me when they're offering a redacted video. I haven't been offered I didn't know that redacted video existed.
I mean, I think the record is pretty clean so far in this case, and I really don't want to get into stuff about her having a child removed that doesn't have anything to do with what we're trying here.
Well, it does, because in here she says that the reason the child is removed is because of something that Antoine has done. So that, I think, makes it germane to what we have here, because her feelings about Antoine.
How is it germane now when it wasn't germane 15 minutes ago when you didn't play it?
Your Honor, I didn't play it out of abundance of caution, but now that the defense attorney has said to this jury that we're hiding something from them, I think that it's even more important.
Okay. Your argument to me a moment ago was that the impression is being created that this was all a ruse, that DCS was merely a prop. And what the solution I'm offering is that the parties agree and stipulate that DCS, in fact, during the course of this same interview, asked a number of questions of Ms. Howington that were not germane to this proceeding. Which, doesn't that answer the question that this was a ruse?
Yes, Your Honor.
I think that Mr. Whalen.
That was his argument, though, not
I
mine.
understand. Why does that announcement and agreed stipulation not cure your worries? I really think you're prying the lid off of a box you may not want to pry it off of, General, to go into why she lost another child when you're prosecuting her for felony murder and the perpetration of aggravated child neglect. Do we really want to pry the lid off that box?
I don't know how to undo when the defense attorney stands up and gives the impression to the jury that the state is leaving things out on purpose so that they can't see it. I don't know how to undo that, so that's my concern.
May I suggest a remedy? Stop introducing redacted videos without telling someone you've redacted the video. They did the same thing with the first cruiser video. I said, what are you introducing? The cruiser video. And it turned out it was two very brief snippets of the cruiser video. If they don't want me to say why you're doing that, let me know you're doing it before you do it. That's actually required by the rule. They should be telling me what they're introducing, not telling me it's the cruiser video when it's not the full thing, or it's the this interview when it's not the full thing.
Folks, we can sit here and argue for the next couple of hours about what has transpired and what hasn't. We can't change the fact that this video has been introduced. Investigator Tonkin has testified about what transpired in the interview room between she and Ms. Howington. You have cross-examined and you asked the questions about the DCS worker being there. I am respectfully suggesting to both of you that I am offering you both a relatively painless way out of this dilemma that we find ourselves in. I'm going to have to listen to what was said in the DCS portion of the interview before I can rule on it. Are you that insistent that you want this in the record, General?
I think it's actually already in the record. I mean, she talks about it in her interview with Detective Riddle. I think that the caution was we just didn't want to draw more attention to it. But she's already said it in her interview. Like, she specifically talks about the issues and she hasn't seen her child in all these years. It's already in the record. Just put it out there.
How long is it? Why don't we do this? Why don't we take 10 minutes and let's just think it over and what the ramifications are of introducing this evidence. And then if I have to, I'll come back and listen to it. We'll stand in recess for 10 minutes.
back to you.
Everyone may have a seat. Waive the call for the state. For the defense. All right, General McDermott, I believe the parties have an announcement they wish to make to the court.
Yes, Your Honor. The parties, the state and the defense, agree and stipulate that DCS asked Ms. Howington questions not pertaining to this incident, which are not relevant to this case in particular. Therefore, a redacted copy of this interview was introduced.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you may accept a stipulation as accepted fact between the parties. It's not in dispute. Do you have any further questions of this witness on redirect?
Just briefly, Detective Tonkin, as far as what you were doing in the course and scope of whenever Investigator Wardlaw and Investigator Riddle were doing their interview, were you just standing right outside the door or anything like that?
No.
Okay. Were you doing other things pertaining to this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Were you coordinating with other individuals and with DCS and your supervisors and things of that nature?
Yes, ma'am.
That's all.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
All right. Ladies, you may step down, Detective Tonkin. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 5 o'clock. Good news and bad news. You want the good news first or the bad news first? The good news is that I think we've reached a point today where you've worked very hard, the lawyers have worked hard, and I think they've all agreed that maybe it's a good stopping point for today's work. There is obviously more that needs to be done in this case. You're going to be hearing further testimony tomorrow, so I want to give you the same instructions and admonitions that I gave you the previous 2 nights. You'll recall that you're on the honor system. Don't look at any media accounts about this case. Do not attempt to learn anything at all about this case from any independent source, and do not discuss this case with any other person at all. I want each of you to be in a position to judge this case based only on what you have heard in this courtroom and no place else. Have a very good evening. Enjoy some basketball if that is your preference, and I will see you back here. Report directly to the jury room like you did this morning. Be there by 10:15, just as we did this morning. My goal is to get you in here as close to 10:30 as possible and get back to work. I'm very fortunate tomorrow. I've only got an 8-page docket, which for a Thursday is a rarity. So we should be able to start back pretty close to 10:30. Have a very good evening. We'll see you back tomorrow morning. All rise for the jury. All right, everyone may have a seat. Let's take just a couple of minutes before we break for the day to think about jury instructions. I don't think I've asked Ms. Mullins to give you a rough copy of the instructions yet. What is the state's position on the lesser included offenses that should be charged in the felony murder count?
I believe General Ammons said the last time that we were in court what our position. This is a topic that he was researching.
The only question I have is on second-degree murder. I think that it's clear that voluntary manslaughter would not be a lesser. I think we all can agree on that. I think we all agree that reckless homicide and criminally negligent homicide under Burns would be should be instructed.
Yes, sir.
Second degree is a result of conduct offense. my initial impression was it should not be charged. I found a case, but that involves aggravated child abuse as opposed to aggravated child neglect.
Correct.
Clearly, under aggravated child abuse, it would be instructed, but that's not what we have here.
Can we just have till tomorrow morning?
Yeah, let's
to
look at it. I didn't know if either side had looked at it yet. I'm gonna go on Westlaw tonight and look a little bit more and see if there's anything out there. My inclination is not to charge it, but I don't know yet, so. And then on, the neglect counts, I think on the one where serious bodily injury is alleged, we would charge reckless aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. On the one where the deadly weapon is alleged, reckless endangerment. And then on the, which count involves is the, on the tampering counts is the attempt count involving the phone.
We'll have to make an election on that.
Well, you're gonna have to make an election on the false report. So there wasn't, I thought there was a bill of particulars done on the tampering counts.
I asked for a bill of particulars, the response was, we've indicted you and provided discovery.
Your Honor, for a bill of particulars, we have to be ordered to do one, so it's not like that we're just not doing something that we're supposed to be doing in this case.
We're not gonna argue about it, okay? I'm just simply asking, I've got a tampering count that is a consummated count, i.e., she is alleged to have concealed an item, a thing, and I'm assuming that's the firearm. There is an attempted count where she's accused of attempting to tamper with evidence by altering, attempting to alter a thing, and I'm assuming that's the cell phone.
I think it's in the indictment, if the court would
It's
let.
not. The indictment just says thing in both counts, which is the language from the statute, but I need to know which things we're talking about.
I think conceal would be the firearm, alter would be the phone.
I think that's the only one that makes logical sense, but I just want to confirm that. So I'll charge the consummated, the way it's indicted on the firearm, tampering with evidence, and then I think I've got to charge attempt as well. It's indicted as an attempt, so I can't think of what a lesser would, I don't think there's any lessers on that. All right. I'm gonna have an expert witness instruction.
That's the only thing I can think of that would be additional, but I will look at that tonight, and if there's anything else, I'll let you know at 10 o'clock tomorrow.
All right. Mr. Whalen, have you thought any about the instructions and what you wish to have included?
Not sufficiently, no. I'll look at that.
From a logistical standpoint, let's talk about tomorrow. You've got, in all likelihood, 3 witnesses, General, left.
And maybe 4, I don't know if we're gonna call 8 tomorrow.
So with any luck, the state's gonna be resting their proof, maybe by mid-afternoon, late afternoon.
Probably late afternoon,
I would like to get all of the evidence in tomorrow, if we can do that, and get all the proof concluded. And then if it's late in the day, we'll come back Friday morning and argue and charge it, but that's kind of my goal. So get a good night's sleep. If we have to, work till 6:30 or 7 o'clock tomorrow night, in order to get all the proof in, I think we need to do that. All right, anything else we need to take up today?
Not from the state.
Your Honor, as far as, one thing I guess that we would want potentially is looking at, TPI 4227, there's an inference of concealment or destruction of evidence. That one.
No, I mean, that's appropriate.
Yeah.
Do you want does either side want the pattern instruction on admissions against interest?
What number is that one?
It's in the 42s. I can't remember what the number is. 4211. I mean, it's appropriate. Does either side want it charged?
I didn't bring my book, chance to look at
It's the pattern instructions on admissions against interest.
Yes, I think that's appropriate.
I think I'll charge that too. All right. Everybody have a good evening, get a good night's rest, and I'll see you back here, be in your chairs, ready to go to work, not later than 10:15 tomorrow morning. Ms. Howington, be sure to be here by that time. Court will stand adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Everybody have a good evening.